What if AI deleted your entire digital life tomorrow? People trust the cloud more than physical storage, but people have been permanently locked out of their accounts after automated systems flagged innocent photos as dangerous. Imagine losing every family photo, every wedding video, every memory you've ever saved, all gone overnight, not because of a hardware failure, because an algorithm made a mistake, or because you stopped paying. The truth is, you don't own your cloud storage. You just rent access to your memories. This might be the most successful heist in tech history. In 2021, a San Francisco father noticed unusual swelling on his toddler's body and contacted his doctor. Since the COVID-19 pandemic was going on at the time, the doctor asked for some photos to help diagnose the problem remotely. The father agreed immediately. It was a responsible act of parenting. Thanks to the photos, the doctor was able to diagnose the issue and prescribe some antibiotics. That should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. It took a far darker turn. The very instant the father took the photos, his Android phone did what it was programmed to do. It uploaded copies to the cloud. It's supposed to be a helpful feature. People have been led to believe that cloud storage is a net positive. It's a way to ensure we always have backups of our most important photos, videos, and files. It's supposed to be the better alternative to the physical SD cards that came before. But this dad was about to find out the brutal reality, because when those photos were synced to the cloud, Google's automated artificial intelligence algorithms scanned each one and flagged the photos. A machine devoid of human emotion and understanding doesn't understand context. In the blink of an eye, the father's accounts were disabled. Google simply cut him off of everything: his cloud storage, his contacts, his photos, his emails. A decade's worth of digital assets disappeared before the man even knew what was happening. Police investigated and found no crime. The father was cleared of any wrongdoing, but still, Google refused to reinstate his account. This was just the beginning. Experts believe there could be thousands more cases just like this, where people are cut off from their own content because of machines making mistakes. And it all comes down to a shift in the way we store our data. Tech giants and smartphone companies have surreptitiously coerced and corralled us into a world of data tenancy. Your memories, your photos, and your creations are no longer your property. Stored safely on physical cards and flash drives, they are leased assets held hostage behind corporate firewalls and subject to the unpredictable actions of algorithms beyond your control. And you have to pay for the privilege. But if the cloud is this dangerous and expensive, why were we forced into it? By 2016, the smartphone revolution was effectively over, not because people weren't interested in smartphones, but because the vast majority of them already owned one. Global penetration was closing in on 70%. In developed markets like the US, that number was much higher, with over 90% of the population owning their own device. Up to that point, tech giants had enjoyed years of easy, explosive growth. All they had to do was make more phones and new models. Billions bought into the hype, but over time, the curve began to flatten. The market hit a wall. Hardware innovation also began to stall. The difference between the previous model and current one was minimal. Processors had peaked, screen resolutions had reached incredible levels of clarity, and cameras were better than ever. Each new phone brought improvements, but they felt less dramatic and more marginal than before. So sales started to drop. People began to hold on to their existing phones for longer periods of time. There was no need to invest in the latest model. That's when manufacturers began to panic. Their profits were plateauing. Their old methods were becoming less and less efficient with every passing year. If they couldn't maximize profit by selling more phones, they had to find another way to extract money from their customers. And they found it. Manufacturers started to remove existing features from their phones and sell that same feature back to consumers at a higher cost. It was a pretty devious strategy. We saw the first signs of it in 2016 when Apple removed the headphone jack from its iPhone 7. The company claimed it was a necessary change to make its phone sleeker and more modern. It was a gamble, and it paid off. While some customers complained, the vast majority adapted and the world went on to spend literally billions of dollars on expensive wireless earbuds. It was a great awakening for the phone industry. They could engineer their own problems and then sell the solution for a higher price. It worked with a headphone jack, so it would with another long-running phone feature, one that had been squeezing profit margins for years: the SD card. The industry needed a new profit lever, and they found it by artificially restricting the cheapest component of the phone. The great heist had begun. When the iPhone 15 Pro was released in 2023, the base model offered 128 gigabytes of storage, and the cost was $999. The 512 gig variant, meanwhile, was sold for almost $1,300. That extra $300 paid for an additional 384 gigabytes of storage space. But Apple only paid around $25 for the NAND flash memory to make that 512GB phone. That is a markup of nearly 1,100%. It's like walking into a restaurant and paying $150 for a steak that only cost $12 to prepare. There's no way to justify it. It's nothing but greed, an unadulterated and entirely shameless extraction of wealth from consumers who are left with no other choice but to pay up. People don't need a slightly improved smartphone camera or slightly faster processor. They need storage, though. They need space to store their ever-expanding libraries of photos, videos, apps, games, and other files. Every year, that demand increases. The tech giants know it. They realize that tiered storage is, in fact, the last remaining infinite profit lever they can pull. It is one of the lowest cost upgrades in tech, and one of the most profitable. But there was one obstacle in the way of this seemingly perfect profit-making plan: the SD card. For years, consumers caught on to the fact that they didn't need to spend an extra $200 or $300 on a model with extra storage. They just needed a phone with an SD slot. They could buy a microSD card for a fraction of the cost and not have to worry about running out of room. It was a simple workaround, one that millions of users took advantage of. People bought Android phones because they could add extra memory for a fraction of the price that Apple charged. But eventually, the big Android brands realized that the SD slots had to go. But if they wanted to pull off their 1,000% markup, they couldn't just tell the public they wanted more money. They needed a narrative, and they had to convince people that SD cards couldn't physically fit into the latest devices. They had to lie. Phone companies and obliging tech journalists like to say that modern phones can't support SD cards anymore. They're too compact and advanced. Thanks to their slick designs, there's just not enough space for expandable storage these days. It sounds reasonable, convincing even. But when you look at the numbers, the entire narrative falls apart. The physical volume of a microSD card is approximately 0.01 cubic inches. It's about the same size as 11 grains of rice. Even when you include the card reader and the slot that holds it, the entire system is tiny. Think about all those components in a phone: the battery, the camera modules, even the motor that makes the phone vibrate. They all take up space. Some of them take up significantly more space than the SD card slot. Yet none of them were removed or deemed surplus to requirements. The companies only focused on the storage slots, which just so happened to be the one feature stopping them from maximizing their profits. Fitting a component this small into a smartphone isn't some impossible engineering problem, it's a design decision, nothing more. But what about the other argument, the waterproofing argument? Most smartphone brands argue that cutting a hole into the side of a water-resistant device simply doesn't make sense. Removing the slot is the trade-off to achieve the dust and water protection that consumers are after. That's another lie. The Sony Xperia 1 managed to achieve an IP68 rating while still including a user-accessible microSD card slot. That means it could withstand dust and immersion in water. This wasn't some niche budget phone either. It was a flagship device launched in 2023 with a top-tier Snapdragon processor and a 4K display. It was able to do what other companies claimed was impossible. It offered a modern water-resistant phone without sacrificing its expandable storage in the process. Thanks to this, the industry's physical excuses had fallen apart. Their narrative no longer held water, and so they pivoted to a new smokescreen: speed. As the years passed, smartphone manufacturers weren't solely focused on removing storage slots from their device. They were still working to improve other features and specs too, pouring much of their time and energy into making cameras more advanced. These additions were marketed as revolutionary tools, bringing professional filmmaking tools to your pocket and promising sharper, cleaner, more detailed photos than ever before. In reality, there was a much darker reason. Yes, 8K recording allows users to capture images and videos in extraordinary quality, but those images and videos also took up more space than their predecessors. A single minute of 8K 60 frame per second ProRes video consumes approximately 45 gigs of storage. At that rate, an entry-level iPhone with 128 gigs of storage would be full with just 3 minutes of filming. It's a similar story on Android. Better cameras and recording technologies are marketed as exciting features, but they are storage vacuums. Suddenly, tech companies had the perfect narrative to support their design decisions. They argued that microSD cards couldn't keep up with today's read and write speeds. They're too slow to work with such vast volumes of data. They claimed that allowing users to record directly onto SD cards would lead to system crashes and long processing times. It would negatively affect the user's experience. The data disproves this myth. In 2023, the SD Association introduced the SD Express 9.1 standard, which supports speeds of up to 4 gigs per second. There is no reason why a modern SD card wouldn't be able to cope with raw 4K or even 8K video files. The technology is there. It has existed for years. Smartphone companies just like to pretend it doesn't because that doesn't align with their agenda. The real problem isn't the technology, it is the policies of these mega corporations. Big phone manufacturers are now refusing to engineer their phones to support high-speed SD card architecture. They have crippled their devices and then blamed the cards for not being fast enough. The artificial storage crisis has pushed consumers toward the final stage of their trap. Because if your phone gets full after just a few minutes of filming, you've only got one option left: the cloud. That's where the real hostage situation begins. Imagine two customers, both need several terabytes for storage of their videos, photos, and personal files. One buys a 2TB MicroSD XC card for around $160. There's just one payment, that's it. The other chooses cloud storage instead, priced at $10 a month. But over 5 years, the average device lifecycle, that cheap plan adds up to $600, the same price as 4 high-end SD cards, just to rent what the first customer owns outright. And the moment those payments stop, the access is cut off. This is the insidious nature of the cloud storage society. It's not a traditional consumer transaction, it's more like a ransom deal. With physical cards, you are always in control. You own your cards. You own your files. You may not be able to buy new cards right away, but you still have access to all the photos and videos you saved and stored on your old ones. With cloud storage, it is an entirely different story. If, for any reason, you can't afford to keep paying, you're cut off. Your backups will vanish, your files become inaccessible, and a lifetime's worth of memories is scheduled for permanent deletion by a soulless algorithm. This is the reality facing numerous consumers across the world, all because these big companies have coerced them into the cloud ecosystem. They were told the cloud is the future, it's the safest place to store your files, you'll never need to worry about running out of room again, all for the cost of a couple of cups of coffee a month. What they don't mention is that you're stepping into a recurring payment loop. Over the life of a device, it can cost multiple times more than physical storage. And when you switch devices, your data doesn't switch with you. It stays behind in the system, tied to ongoing payments. The more data you store, the harder it becomes to walk away. It's harder to escape the trap. This $600 ransom isn't just a side hustle for tech companies, it's become the foundation of their entire business model. For decades, technology companies profited on hardware alone. They made products, people bought those products. The transaction ended there. For a while, that was enough. The biggest tech firms became household names through these one-off, finite transactions. But Wall Street doesn't like limits. Investors don't want one-off revenue boosts, they want money streams that pour in month after month, year after year. To achieve that, they couldn't rely on singular hardware sales alone. They had to shift towards selling services instead. So as hardware began to approach peak saturation, tech executives began to rewrite their business models. They began to behave less like conventional hardware makers and more like digital landlords. In 2025, Apple's services segment, which primarily revolves around iCloud subscriptions, generated over $100 billion. That's enough to buy over 1,000 of the world's finest private jets, the Gulfstream G700s, every year. It's more than the combined annual revenue of companies like Nike and McDonald's. Other cloud storage services like Google One have also reported record-breaking profits, and much of that revenue is tied to the removal of the SD card slot. It was the last remaining hurdle in the path of total corporate control of user data. The death of the SD card wasn't an accident, it was a sacrifice at the altar of the services empire. But is the fight over, or is there some sliver of hope left? History has proven that the tech sector doesn't always get its way. From Google Glass to 3D TVs, there have been dozens of situations in which these big brands have attempted to force things onto the consumer market, but eventually people stood up and said no. If you think this doesn't apply to cloud storage, you might want to take a closer look. Because while everyday users have been steered into paid subscriptions, professionals are doing something very different. They're rejecting the model entirely. It didn't take long for the likes of filmmakers, photographers, journalists, and researchers to realize that cloud storage wasn't a benefit but a liability. If you're working in an environment where high-speed internet isn't available, then cloud synchronization won't work for you. If you're creating corporate content that needs to remain confidential, you don't want to compromise your ownership by sending it to cloud servers. Professional users want control, portability, and ownership. Regulatory bodies, too, are beginning to look more closely at the cloud empire. They're questioning whether it's justified for tech giants to effectively seal devices shut and force consumers into subscription systems. We've already seen what regulation can do. When the European Union introduced rules standardizing charging ports, companies like Apple were effectively forced to adopt USB-C. In theory, the same kind of regulation could be applied to storage, requiring manufacturers to reintroduce SD card slots in future smartphones. While the future remains unclear, one thing is certain: the battle isn't over. It's a dispute over features. It's a shift from hardware ownership to service dependency, and it's forcing us to ask, do we own our digital lives or are we just renting them? Because whichever model wins will define the next era of technology. As smartphones remove features and push prices higher, more people are starting to turn away from them. And surprisingly, that's bringing back nostalgia for older devices, especially one in particular. Watch The Indestructible Phone That Destroyed Its Own Company to find out the real story behind an iconic device. Or click on this video.